Our guest presenters today are Rachel Santulli and Amanda Adams. And hello. I'm going to give a quick bio for both of them, and then I'm going to let them take it away. So Rachel is a plant biotech at Midway Atoll National Wildlife Refuge. Her conservation journey started in 2015, working with the University of Central Florida Marine Turtle Research Group, collecting data on nesting sea turtles. She then joined Kupu AmeriCorps, which brought her to the Hawaiian Islands, helping with predator removal, habitat restoration, endangered monitoring, and botulism response for endangered sea or water birds, and other conservation tasks at Kauai National Wildlife Refuge Complex prior to coming to Midway in 2021. Since then, she has led the invasive plant program at Midway Atoll National Wildlife Refuge, working toward eradicating Verbesina while controlling other nuisance incipient plant species on the refuge. Amanda, hi Amanda. Amanda Adams is a biological science technician, also with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at Midway Atoll National Wildlife Refuge. She has worked in conservation for 9 years and a variety of field work, including intertidal ecology at Shoals Marine Lab. And I always say this wrong. Is it pipping or piping plovers? You'll let me know when you get started. And common terns on Cape Cod, and Florida grasshopper sparrows. She now specializes in plant ecology and habitat restoration and has run the Midway Native Plant Nursery and Restoration Program for the past 4 years. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rachel and Amanda. And thank you so much for being here. Looking forward to learning from you.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. It's piping plover, but you can say pipping if you feel like it. But
I don't know why. I always want to do that. Piping. I mean, there's
some
if it
people
was
say
2 P's,
plover or
right?
plover. It's different.
Plover,
Yeah,
plover,
you have to.
exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Birds.
much.
Birds.
Birds.
Okay, so we're going to start with me. Hi, I'm Rachel Santulli, contrary to the name at the bottom of my little face bubble. And give me 2 seconds while I find the mouse to share the screen.
Mice have a way of doing that, disappearing.
And I think we did it.
It's popping up right now. You're good to go.
For those of you that are joining us, we are out on Midway, which is super exciting, but it also means that our internet connection is slower than the average person. So thank you for your patience in advance. So just, Kim, if you can let me know when you can see our presentation, and then I will get us started.
We can see it. It looks beautiful.
Perfect. Okay, so from weeds to wildlife, as Kim has mentioned, my name is Rachel. I am the invasive plant lead here on Midway. I've been doing this job for the last 4 years, either as a contractor through Kupu or FOMA, Friends of Midway Atoll, and now I'm a biological technician in the same position, still trying to eradicate the plants that you will soon hear about. So first off, I have to figure out which button to move along in the presentation. We're thriving.
Yeah,
we did it. Okay, so currently we are out on Midway. It is the big star that you see up here on the left. It is approximately 1,300 miles northwest from Honolulu. We're actually the second to last island in the Hawaiian archipelago, midway between Japan and California, hence the name. If you have heard of Battle of Midway, you know of us well. And I'm sure if you were in an earlier webinar with Stefan, he may have given you a little bit of a brief understanding of our location. So that is where we are located. We have several million birds out here in varying different species, and essentially our main goal here is to create or cultivate a environment that is best for them and their breeding and brooding and just everyday lifestyle. So this is our atoll. It is made up of 3 different islands. You've got Sand Island, where most of the work is done, and then over here we have Eastern and Spit. A couple years ago, Spit actually connected with Eastern during a storm, so they are now one island, but we still call them and work on them as 3 separate islands across the way. Sand Island is about 2.5 miles long, as well as Eastern Island, give or take a little bit. So first off, why is biosecurity important? I'm sure you've heard a lot about this throughout this month, given that it is Invasive Species Awareness Month. Essentially, there's been a lot of hands in the basket that is Midway over the last couple years, well, centuries. So first off, we started with it being a military island, and you had the commercial Pacific Cable Company and U.S. Navy, and then in 1998, it was taken over by the Fish and Wildlife Service. But while we had the Navy here, as well as the cable company, there was a lot of introduction of various species, including rodents and various types of plants. Some of them were brought over intentionally, like ironwoods and as like windbreakers. Some of the other ones were brought over just as orientals, and they ended up becoming somewhat of a problem, which is what we're still working on today. One of the main plants that we'll be talking about is one that we believe came over in just the potting soil, but we'll get into that in a moment. Currently, this is kind of a makeup of what the island is made up with plants. The red is mostly ironwoods, the green is native, and then the orange is various other types of non-native, somewhat invasive, some nuisance, and some they're just not native. They're not really causing any problems, but they also weren't originally here. They were brought here by humans. For the most part, I would say that non-natives make up about 90% of the vegetative cover. But we do have 23 native species that are here that Amanda will be happy to get into later, as I'm the person that kills plants. I do not cultivate them. So the main plant of my project is Verbesina encelioides, also known as golden crown beard. It is part of the Asteraceae family, or the sunflower family. We're not 100% positive how it got here, but it is believed to maybe have been in the soil of a potted plant that was brought over during the time that the island was under the Navy's care. The seeds are known to stay viable in a dormant state in soil for many years, something that we haven't even fully been able to figure out, but it's been at least 3 years, can range up to 10 years that the seeds are still able to produce a flower and continue to reproduce. So having a soil with those seeds in it unaware and then creating an issue on island future makes sense. This plant is native to southwestern United States or in northern Mexico, has the ability to grow up to 4 feet, dependent on different light and water availability, and is known to cause a few problems here for our seabirds. So really quickly, some of the birds that we have on island consist of Laysan albatross and black-footed albatross. We have 2 of the largest colonies of those in the world here, and so trying to create an environment that is best for them is one of the main focuses that we have here. And so Verbesina causes a couple problems for these birds to brood and create life. So what does that look like? Right now, Verbesina has the potential to outcompete native vegetation. One of the things that it does is creates a monoculture environment. Essentially, it becomes the only plant in the vicinity, which causes issue when it comes to diversity, but also when it comes to having a field of 4-foot tall plants. It can be very difficult to brood and fledge chicks and fledglings. But it also causes issues for them in the aspect that it disrupts wind flow. So essentially it creates these dense, hot thickets that makes it difficult for the chicks to thermal regulate since they have down feathers, in addition to interrupts their fledging ability. So if you don't have the ability to outstretch your wings and to start to build those muscles, if you have a difficult time running because you're getting entangled in these large thickets with very tall plants, it has the ability to increase mortality. So we wanted to remove these plants so then that way we can create an environment where chicks can get airflow and where they can also build the necessary muscles to fledge and have the ability to actually run and leave the island out into the ocean. So some of the challenges that Verbesina creates is, one, it is year-round growth. So since it is in a favorable environment, aka it is somewhere that has the amount of light and water on a consistent basis to continue its growth cycle, this is a constant fight. There is no break in the year where Verbesina is not growing. So year round, we have to constantly be looking for it and treating it to avoid it coming back. It only takes 30 days to seed. So we have these 3 islands, 2.5 mile long, that need to be transected or checked on a monthly basis every 30 days in hopes to find them before they go to seed and start reproducing and causing more plants to grow. The seeds are very, very light and they're very small, so they are wind dispersed. So one gust and it can take them a couple meters to feet away. And the seeds per head can range around 350 to 500 seeds per flower head. So you can see what kind of a problem that can create. One plant can produce thousands of seeds in just a month. So for our treatment evolution, this project has actually started before, it's been about 20 years. So to give you kind of an idea of how much effort's been put into this project in the hopes to eradicate this plant to create a favorable environment for these birds is quite a lot. So originally, as you can see in this picture over here, they would use, this was way before my time, my friends. I was not here when all of this started, but I will do my best to give you a rundown and answer your questions at the end if it pertains to this. But in the beginning, they would use heavy machinery, bulldozers, lawnmowers, things like that to help remove. As you can see, it's this huge field. All of this on both sides is Verbesina, and you can see nothing else amongst all of those plants. During that time, we, as a refuge, started to notice that it wasn't very favorable. In doing this, yes, it temporarily removed the plants, but it actually ended up aiding it by spreading the seeds and creating denser, deeper seed banks, which would become a larger issue in the long term. So in 2011 is when a pre-emergent herbicide was introduced into the project to help eliminate those seeds that could be dormant but still viable for years into the program. So big machinery didn't kill the seeds, plants kept growing back. If anything, it helped disperse them more. Changed to herbicide, which was Milestone, a pre-emergent, essentially a herbicide that kills the seeds before they emerge from the ground, before they become a plant and they start to utilize sunlight. They are killed, for lack of a better word. Currently, we still use the pre-emergent herbicide with a cocktail of post-emergent and surfactant, but we do a atoll-wide transect. Essentially, we walk the entire atoll once a month and looking for these plants, in addition to spot treatments and drop seed checks. So what that means is that we check for plants that go to seed. I'll get into that a little bit more. The reason that we knew that this wasn't working was through various monitoring efforts. In the beginning, during the large machinery removal and moving into the milestone 2011 period, it started off with plot plant density. Essentially, there would be plots around the atoll that would become areas that would be checked on a regular basis, and they would look to see what percentage and what amount of that plot was which type of plant. How much of it, what percentage was Verbesina, which percentage was sweet alyssum, which percentage was goosegrass, and kind of look and see what plants made up the ground cover there. And as treatments continued and continued and continued, the Verbesina number started to lessen, and so those plot density locations became not a very accurate way to be able to see if the success was continuing further. So what ended up happening moving forward was a calculation of how many plants were killed. Essentially, each island is broken up into various sectors across the entire atoll. There are 61 sectors. Each one, as mentioned, gets transected within 30 days. Each sector, you count how many plants you found, Verbesina plants you found and you killed. And we would use that to track if our numbers were decreasing and if our efforts were, in fact, working. Now, starting in 2020, things have shifted a little bit. It's become so successful that tracking the amount of individual plants wasn't just enough to continue progression in the eradication process. So we started looking at drop seeds found. A drop seed is a Verbesina plant that fully matures, turns into a flower. The flower then moves past its normal process, starts producing seeds. The seeds are fall on the ground to help create new plants. We started to not only treat, we started to document using GPS location, exact locations on where these plants were found, which is the map that you see here. Every single dot is a drop seed that was documented since 2020. The blue dots are 2020 to 2023 locations, and the red dots were all drop seeds that were found last year in 2024. Those are areas that we go and look at least twice a month, if not 3 times a month, see if there's anything growing there and treat the location in hopes to eliminate any plants before they go to seed. And this is what progression looks like, my friends. So this is the same spot in 2 different time periods. This was before milestone was used. This was after milestone is used. You can see that there, you can't see any other ground cover at all in this location before milestone was being used, before the pre-emergent. Once those efforts started to change and we started looking at alternate ways to eliminate this plant, including the herbicide cocktail, you can see that other plants started to have the ability to grow. So in here right now, there are mostly non-natives in this picture, but they're not ones that harm the breeding process and the brooding process for the albatross. In the picture on the left, you can't even see an albatross. Picture on the right, you can see the density in which we have here on island, most of which for ground cover, I believe it looks like sweet alyssum, St. Augustine grass, and goosegrass currently over here. But when this project started, it was about 78% of Eastern Island and 68% of Sand Island were covered in Verbesina. So essentially 2/3 of both islands were only Verbesina. After 2015 and up until current, we have less than 1% of ground cover as Verbesina, which is amazing. We are still in that less than 1%, but we are the closest that we've ever been. Our last year were groundbreaking numbers due to the Verbesina team and the volunteer crew that come and do this work on a regular basis. Currently, what we have been mostly focusing on is areas on the coastal, which is where we have native naupaka, which Verbesina loves to hide in. So most of our effort currently is focusing on those areas. As you can see in this picture, all of these again are this drop seeds similar to that previous map. The difference in colorations now is everything that is red is a drop seed that was found in any type of vegetation that isn't naupaka. Everything in green is a drop seed found in naupaka. So let me say that in a less confusing way. Green is a Verbesina plant that produces seeds found in native naupaka plants. Red is any other type of vegetation. So it could be open area, it could be ironwood, it could be different types of shrubbery. But right now our main focus is on naupaka locations along the coastal edge. It's just difficult to see, and here is your example. Both of these images on the left and the right have a Verbesina plant growing in them. But to the untrained eye, it's not easy to see. So if you want to give yourself a second, see if you can find it. I am going to show you in about 4 seconds where these locations are. But 3, 2, 1. You got one right there. Very difficult to see. Again, the colorations are the same. When you're just walking past quickly, if you aren't used to looking for it, you're not going to see it. And this is why we have such a difficult time in these areas, is it's just hard to see, so it's more likely to go to seed. The flowers of this plant are also yellow, so as you look at the naupaka, that's starting to turn yellow. Even the flowers have a tendency to become difficult to view. And the second picture, that is your itty bitty tiny little seedling. But it gives you kind of an idea of where we are currently in our project and where most of our focus is going. This is just the numbers over the years. I wanted to put this up there so you could see between 2018 and 2024, the decrease in overall numbers. This is just plants found across the board. March is our highest year. If you look at 2018, you can see that we had around 124,000 plants. Last year in March, we had barely over 3,000. So you can see that the efforts that we're putting in, though it's a lot of effort, it is making massive differences, and we are very excited every month to look at our numbers and see that this is a continuous decline. Really quickly, things that we do outside of Verbesina work, there is invasive versus incipient. Essentially invasive, which again, you probably heard during this entire month, is anything that causes harm to the environment, economy, or human.
Oh, there, you're back. You were paused for a moment there. Internet.
Your internet connection is unstable, is what we're seeing. So apologies in advance. Okay, so essentially, yes, we work on Verbesina, but we also have incipients, which are plants that could become invasive and problematic that we also control and target on island. This is just a list of some of the plants that we also treat right here. And we keep an eye on in hopes to not have, if we're going to spend all this time on Verbesina, the goal is to not have any of these become our next Verbesina. So we do treat other plants. One of those plants, as just an example, is the euphorbia, also known as wild poinsettia. This is a plant that harbors mosquitoes and has the ability to cause avian pox outbreaks because of the mosquitoes. Certain areas on the island about 5 years back, there was around 75 to 90% of the chicks were suffering from avian pox in areas where this plant was growing in large densities. This is a map showing our current, this was 2025 density. In the winter of 2025, areas like here, all of this used to be completely covered in Euphsia. The dots that you see now is all that remain, are the areas that we are still targeting and treating, but all of this area over here was covered in it. This was all covered in it. And with constant efforts and treatment, we've been able to knock those numbers back and are hoping to get those numbers even lower and potentially even eradicate those to avoid causing issues in the future. So essentially, we spend all of our time looking for Verbesina and killing Verbesina, and in our extra time, we go and we attack any other plant that is going to hinder our beautiful, wonderful birds' ability to breed, brood, and live successful lives. I'm going to move it over to Amanda so she can kind of jump into the other half. Once you kill plants, you do have to replace them with some other plants so the birds can have happy lives. If you have any questions for me, please refrain to the end until she is done. And here is Amanda.
Hi. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Rachel. That was a great introduction to the invasives program out here. I'm Amanda Adams. I'm also a biological science technician at Midway, and I get to handle the restoration part of the habitat management program out here. So I'm just going to jump right in. So habitat restoration at Midway Atoll has really a wide scope, and it depends on what kind of resources we have available from year to year and month to month. But our program has 3 main goals, and I'm going to touch on each of them briefly. So first of all, the program was actually started on Midway at a much smaller scale back in 1999, originally to support endangered endemic plant populations. And since then, it has also evolved based on funding that we have and our really amazing volunteers who have helped us with this work to help restore seabird nesting habitat and also to help reintegrate native plants into the landscape to help replace Verbesina in these areas where they once formed really dense thickets. So I'm going to introduce you to our 2 endangered plant species that are endemic to the Hawaiian archipelago. First of all, pōpolo, which is a member of the nightshade family. It's a coastal species that's adapted to coastal conditions. And we have the loulu palm, one of the native Pichardias. And this one in particular is Pichardia remota, which is actually endemic to Nihoa, and it was translocated here. They face similar challenges, but they're really different in growth habit. You can kind of see I've included a little albatross for scale in each picture. You can see just how big the loulu palms are getting out here, which is really exciting because it takes them so long to grow. So jumping right in, pōpolo was listed as endangered in 2016, so relatively recently. It's called that for the Hawaiian word pōpolo, meaning dark, and it's named for the dark purple berries that it grows. It's a really beautiful plant that has this fuzzy, like volutinous, as it's called, fuzz on its leaves that helps insulate it from water loss in arid environments. So it's really well adapted to Midway's conditions. And pōpolo's range spreads across almost the entire Hawaiian archipelago. But with the exception of Nihoa, its population is really low nowadays, and it has been in decline for a lot of time. Just in the past 50 years, it's declined very much. So when it was first listed as endangered in 2016, it was known on most of the main Hawaiian Islands and some of the northwestern Hawaiian Islands and atolls, but not more than 500 on each island, which is a pretty low number. But on Nihoa, which is the main remnant population, we have about 8 to 15,000, and possibly more nowadays. Nihoa is hard to get to and survey. It's a special place. And so this is really, I think pōpolo's story is, it really encapsulates the story of Hawaiian endemic plants in general. These plants are just not well adapted to survive in the conditions that humans have inflicted on their habitats since the islands were populated, especially in the presence of grazing animals and rats and mice. So there were some, there was a population on Maui at one time, but after it was, allowed to have cattle grazing in the area, those individuals completely disappeared, and I don't believe they've been replaced. So just think of all the other native Hawaiian plants this has also happened to without much fanfare. So this is why it's important for us to conserve and protect these populations and help them recover where we can. So restoration on Midway was first begun in 1999 with pōpolo seeds and cuttings first collected from the remnant population that was discovered on Spit Island. And those plants have really formed the backbone of the restoration of pōpolo, both on sand and starting to be restored on Eastern as well. We aim to outplant at least 1,000 pōpolo yearly, and usually we end up planting out at least double that, so it's a really good start. We also began an atoll-wide pōpolo census in 2018 to keep better tabs on how our plants are doing, whether they're surviving from year to year, and where they're surviving the best so that we can choose where we're outplanting these plants better to support their population. And here's a team of our trusty volunteers. I really want to highlight just how much the volunteers help us in our program here. They're just like the backbone, especially of the restoration program, and also of so many other amazing programs out here at Midway. We wouldn't be able to accomplish a fraction of what we do without these guys. So just want to shout out to them. So pōpolo is actually doing pretty well. They are pretty vigorous. Outplants mature quickly and are able to produce a lot of seeds with good viability. One collection effort, just one day or maybe even half a day with our team of volunteers, we can collect more than 1 kilogram of seed, which is about 500,000 of those seeds. And so it's pretty amazing considering some Hawaiian endemics don't necessarily have this reproductive capability, but pōpolo definitely can. So if it's given, the right environment to grow in and a little bit of help from humans propagating it, it can really bounce back pretty quickly. And as we've seen on Midway, we originally had a population of 11 on Spit Island from when it was first rediscovered. Pōpolo now number more than 4,000 across the atoll, thanks to the restoration efforts. Here's a map of the population across the 3 islands that make up the refuge. Most of the population is over here on Sand Island, especially in our restoration areas. This is one of them. Here's another one. But there's also a remnant population on Spit. Next, I'm going to jump to our endemic Pritchardia, or loulu palm, also called Hawaiiani. So this is the species that is endemic to Nihoa, Pritchardia remota. So this plant was listed as endangered in 1996. And its original population on Nihoa is in a very limited range, just in the few remnant valleys on the island. And I'll show you a picture of Nihoa in a moment, and you can just kind of visualize how small this population is. There's only about 700 individuals. So there was a real interest in getting this tree established in a satellite population as insurance. So in 2009, they brought about 300 seeds out here and started propagating this palm tree here. So this is Nihoa. Not a very big island. It's basically a remnant of a volcano that once was, as big as the big island of Hawaii, probably. And so it's a little bit younger in the geological process of, evolution of island to coral atoll. It's much further down the chain. It's the first island in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. In fact, after you pass Niihau, you'll find Nihoa. So Nihoa is actually the most biodiverse island remaining in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, in part because it's so accessible. You can see that these cliffs are really sheer. It's really hard to get to this island, and in part that has saved it from some of the worst invasions that have affected the rest of the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. But even this island has had its share of invasions, and other issues that affect any islands that have humans visiting them. So way back in 1885, there was a biological survey to Nihoa that accidentally set a wildfire, and that wildfire affected the whole island. So you can just imagine how easy it would be for all of these palms to have just gone up in flames. So that was a real, phew moment. We still have these palms. We're lucky to have them. And so this is a picture of one of the two remaining remnant populations on Nihoa in this little arid valley. They're all really close together. And they're kind of, you can tell this isn't an arid environment with how dry and crispy their leaves kind of look. And Nihoa is a very arid island in general. It has been colonized by non-native grasshoppers that seasonally erupt and tend to defoliate pretty much any vegetation on the island. And so Nihoa, while it is more protected than most of the northwestern Hawaiian Island atolls, it's still vulnerable both to fire in the event of, a lightning strike, starting a forest fire, or just, being defoliated by non-native insects or something else we haven't even foreseen yet. So it's especially important to establish a backup population elsewhere as insurance if we want to prevent this particular species of fan palm from going entirely extinct. So the program for the loulu here at Midway has undergone some really great strides. Loulu are very slow growing and can take more than 10 years to flower and produce seed. And so our translocated founder trees didn't even begin flowering until 2020. So with improved techniques and care, we've been propagating about 700 seedlings annually since about 2022. And currently we have over 1,500 young plants in the nursery that are, getting grown under tender loving care conditions. And generally we want to wait at least 2 years until they're a good size to be grown out. You can kind of see on the left here, these guys are little tiny babies, only 6 months old. And these guys are big, strong teenagers, about 2 years old. And this is a size that we've determined is probably the best for, to wait until they're larger before we outplant them. And so we've gotten over 100 outplanted trees, and we plan to outplant at least 300 more this year. So we're already making really good progress in more than doubling the total population. And so they take a while to get established, but once they get to a certain size, they're out of the danger zone, and they are really popular with the albatross chicks. In fact, this tree is 3 years old, and this albatross chick is really liking this tree. And I almost always see 3 to 4 underneath each one because they create some really nice shade. And as they get older and bigger, they'll just keep on creating good shade for these birds. So now I'd like to transition into talking more about Midway's large-scale habitat management. One of our former coworkers, Laura Brazier, produced this really great poster featuring some research that has been finding some interesting results in associations between albatross nest success and habitat associations. And I'll summarize that for you in just a minute. But I just wanted to highlight Laura's work. So across Midway, there are 4 dominant types of habitat. The first one is similar to this, is open habitat dominated by non-native grasses and forbs. And at one time, as Rachel has highlighted, this whole field would have been just chock full of Verbesina from side to side. And you can see just how much more open and accessible to the birds it is now. We also have non-native ironwood forest. It looks nice and shady, but almost no seabirds are nesting underneath this. And we'll get to the reasons why. We also have dense coastal shrubs, naupaka, which stabilize the island's dunes, and they pretty much line the island from edge to edge. And we also have areas dominated by native bunch grasses, Erogostus variabilis, or kavilu as it's called. And so the overall results of the research showed that generally the best nest success was in habitats with native bunch grasses and in open interior environments, and really low nest success in ironwood forest. And so for seabirds, the reason why is tied to their biology as seabirds that have to either have a strong wind or a really long running start to take off. So open habitats, whether it's with bunch grasses or just non-native dominant plants, those had in general much better wind speeds, much higher, these two lines. And then ironwood and coastal shrubs had these much lower winds, and that can really make a difference when these birds are fledging. Ironwoods did have lower daily temperature, but it doesn't seem like that made much of a difference, at least at this point in time. It seems like winds are really the dominating factor, or at least that's what the data suggests. So here's a little diagram that can sort of demonstrate how coastal winds affect these birds. The coastal winds will blow up over the tops of the coastal shrubs, which will deflect some of it, especially in winter when we get these really rough storms coming through. This is actually really important. So it's not as though this is a bad part of the habitat. Then those winds will blow further inland. And if they meet something that's blocking their progress further, such as ironwoods or Verbesina, they get deflected upwards and scattered all around. And so this can really affect, the chance of whether albatross chicks that are nesting underneath these plants are going to be able to fledge, it seems. And I think that this is the major payoff of the Verbesina eradication project, where once the entire atoll was almost completely dominated by tall and dense Verbesina thickets, Midway's habitats are now almost entirely open again, and you can see just how many birds we have that are thriving here. And so I really, again, want to highlight our volunteers because they handle so much of the hard work. We aim to outplant at least 5,000 native plants each year. We have 5 major island restoration areas that are managed entirely for native plants. And we also do some opportunistic outplantings outside the restoration areas to address erosion, provide shade, and soil stabilization. So these are plants that are performing services for the birds and helping to reintegrate these plants into the landscape in areas where they had been outcompeted by non-native plants. And as it stands now, the restoration program could not achieve a fraction of what it currently does without the hard work of our beloved volunteers. And of course, the Verbesina technicians and Rachel's work as head Verbesina tech. That's really what has to come before the outplanting, is the really hard and intense labor of removing these plants so that the natives can thrive. So credit where credit's due. Everyone works together to do a large part of this whole project. We couldn't do it without any part. I just want to show you, to finish up, some really cool pictures of a restoration area as it progresses through three years, as the outplantings grow up and become dominant in the landscape, because I've had the privilege of seeing this happen over the course of my 4-year stint here, just as, virtue of being here from year to year, which not everybody gets the chance to. I feel very lucky. So here's a restoration area that was begun in an area where ironwoods were removed to provide better airflow. You can see it's extremely open, almost barren. We have to use fencing in some areas, especially where it's so barren, because the albatross really love to play with the new outplantings, and they're attracted to novelty. So if they see something new in what's basically their living room, they'll go up to it and play with it. And to an albatross, playing with the plant means shredding it and tossing the pieces around like confetti. It's very cute, but it can make my job a little frustrating. And just look at this orange arrow pointing to this particular tree, Tournefortia or heliotrope, because I'll use this as a landmark for all 3 of these photos. So just have an eye out for this tree, because this is basically the same area, and you'll see how it evolves over time. So this is in 2022. Next year, 2023, same tree. You can see the outplantings have matured. They don't need to be fenced anymore. The birds are enjoying them. They're using them for shade. They're using them to cool their feet on the leaves and instead of on the hot sand. And the 3rd year, this whole area is entirely revegetated and really nice habitat that's somewhat open, but also providing shade. You can see this little guy over here is taking advantage of the shady spot. And there's a lot of additional vegetation just mixed in here. Here's some pōpolo in here, actually. And so this is sort of what we want to aim for when we're revegetating areas, as a formation that's not too dense and also, not too open. So it provides some shade and also shelter for the seabirds. And so I just want to finish up with a big thank you. Let's see. Thank you for everyone, to everybody, past, present, future, who's been a part of these projects. The Verbesina techs, the volunteers, staff, our sponsors, grant partners, partner agencies. So many people have had a part in all of this, and we are just the two lucky people who have been the latest in the chain, and we're working to build on everything that these people have done before us. Everything that we've done has been accomplished on the foundations that others before us have laid. So big thank you, mahalo nui loa, to everybody. And we can accept some questions if there's time.
There is, and that was absolutely fabulous. I'm so enamored with the work that you and all your predecessors have done. And for everybody who's joined us, feel free to drop questions in the chat and or the Q&A. I'll be watching those, but of course I have a laundry list of questions. So I will get started with mine. And I don't know where to start, but I'm going to start with Verbesina. That's, I mean, truly impressive how much Verbesina has been removed and cleared from the islands. I'm curious, I know that you do regular surveys, but I'm also curious if, like, how many people are involved in that, like the Verbesina effort?
Very good question.
Yeah.
So we have about 8 to 12 people that work on it throughout the week and throughout the months. There are 4 Verbesina technicians. They are contracted employees that work on it day in and day out. It is their main job. They come and they do it 8 hours a day, as well as doing the incipient and maintenance work on the island, anything plant related. And you have to have a certain kind of physical and mental manpower to be able to do that day in and day out. So it's very impressive. But we also work alongside the volunteers who come in. Volunteers pretty much do everything across the board. If there's anything that needs to get done on island, the volunteers are a part of it. So that means that I think about 1/3 of the work that they do is Verbesina related. So that's killing plants, killing Verbesina, doing the transects, marking locations. They are very involved, which I'm very appreciative of, because some of these things are considered quality check, and I can't check it all by myself. And
Right.
my team can't check themselves. So you've got 4 Verbesina technicians, 4 volunteers, and then you have however many biotechs are on island with Fish and Wildlife at that time. So there's me, Amanda keeps the Verbesina in check in the restoration areas, and then previous biotechs or biologists on island.
Jamie asks, what's the staff to volunteer ratio? Do you know?
I think there is 50%. So we have 8 Fish and Wildlife staff members on refuge currently, maybe still 7. And then 4 volunteers. And then the Verbesina techs are a different company, but they work with us every single day. So technically, if you count the verb techs and the volunteers, it's 8 and 8.
Right. Okay. And since we're talking volunteers and how important they are, what is the commitment from a volunteer?
6 months. 6 lovely months with us.
Fantastic.
Yes. Which if you have questions about volunteering here, please feel free to reach out to either Amanda or I, and we can get you in contact with our supervisory biologist and the volunteer leads here on island.
Fabulous. Important role. And man, what an opportunity to experience, a once in a lifetime, yeah. Okay. So now I want to talk about an invasive species that where I live here on Kauai, we are dealing with and has become quite a problem in the last year and a half. And that's coconut rhinoceros beetle, CRB.
Yeah,
that's her.
I bring that up because
so
Amanda,
we don't have it here, luckily. But what's your specific question?
Well, I bring it up specifically because I had no idea about the loulu and what a story that was, and what great luck you've had with it. I know it's super slow growing. I have two in my yard. Um, but I'm wondering, that brings up a bigger question that I have, and that is about biosecurity. Like these, we talk a lot about biosecurity in the main Hawaiian Islands, that we wish we were doing more. But what does biosecurity look like for you at
For
Midway?
Midway.
And yeah, just give people
A lot of our biosecurity has to do with the shipments that come in and making sure that there's no rodents, there's no ants, any type of small creature that could make its way off of a boat onto the island. There's a lot of effort put into that. For plants, we're working on putting in different things into place. We do have certain measures to avoid bringing plants from island to island, including removal of seeds from the bottoms of our soles of our shoes and things like that. In addition to, we do have emerald beetles here, which is not something we want to introduce to the main Hawaiian Islands. And so there is the checking of your baggage, luggage, your clothing, and things like that prior to leaving the island to make sure that we're also not spreading anything from here onto the main Hawaiian Islands in transit.
And I know that and I've been out to Midway a few times, by air and also by boat. And when we came in by boat, of course, like all of our gear, for each of the different islands and atolls we were stopping at, we had to have new gear for that, like a set
Mm-hmm.
of clothes for that, dedicated to that island. And even at that, all of that was put into a freezer on board the ship for like 48 hours or something. I can't remember the
Correct.
time. But
Yes.
I just like to share that because wow, right? The lengths that we go to protect your very fragile islands. And hopefully we'll start incorporating more of that in the main Hawaiian Islands because, CRB with those loulu, I mean, they're called coconut rhinoceros beetles, but we also know that they attack more than just coconut trees, right? Any
Mm-hmm.
kind of palm, basically, and including our very special native and endemic ones.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I want to move to those ironwood trees. Um, and interesting what you had to say about perhaps the albatross and or other seabird nesting preferences not under ironwood trees, because there's a large colony on the north shore of Kauai,
Mm-hmm.
of lace and albatross that nests
Mm-hmm.
under
Kilauea.
ironwood trees, and they literally have a preference for them.
Huh.
But maybe they're not as dense, right, as what you're experiencing. And so they seek out the shade, and the windbreak, perhaps. But there's a
Mm.
definite pattern where you look at these birds and you see where they're nesting, and it's protected by ironwood. So I found that
I wouldn't,
fascinating.
Kim, I wouldn't be surprised if they like it there a little bit better just because of the altitude. So like I think on Midway, our highest, it's like 35 feet above sea level. Whereas on it's Kilauea Crater Hill area that you're speaking of, right?
Mhm.
So there they have that downwards facing slope that they can kind of utilize to help get into the
Yeah.
air. Where we don't have that here, it's almost basically just flat. And
Okay.
so that might be a factor in why they're more comfortable there than they are here
Yeah,
in this
good point.
environment.
And there's a temperature difference too. You guys are, like you said, 1,300, or by Kauai, maybe 1,200 miles north of us. So it's a little cooler. Maybe heat is not quite as big of an issue. But so that was very interesting to me. And to see your restoration efforts as we talk about restoration and trying to increase the size of our colonies here for Laysan and black-footed albatross, how we might restore that habitat, right? Based on where they currently live and what they seem to prefer. So that's super interesting information that I think can be shared out,
Mhm.
to others. But
Yeah.
okay, so I noticed in one of the photos the snowshoes, and will somebody tell us what? I mean, I know, but tell us what the snow.
Yeah. So we have a very large colony of bone-in petrels. There's also shearwaters that are burrowing birds. So yes, we have our albatross that nest on top of the soil, but they burrow underneath the soil, essentially creating the land to be about Swiss cheese.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And so those shoes, we call them burrow shoes, duck shoes, snowshoes, they kind of help redistribute the weight of an individual. So while you're transecting or working through a colony, you're less likely to crush those burrows and those homes of the shearwaters
Yeah.
and bone-ins.
And that's also an area where ironwoods have an impact too, is that underneath the ironwood trees, the ironwoods shade out any native plants that would get established there. So there's less plants holding the soil in place. And so it's much easier to crush those burrows in ironwoody places. So that's just another factor. But every island is different, elevation, local geography, how dense the trees are, all these things have a factor. So it could be that in some places ironwoods are overall beneficial, or it could be not so beneficial as in Midway. A lot of things come into play.
Absolutely. Totally agree. I mean, it definitely is easier if you have a hard packed ground versus ironwood needles and pine cones. It's easier to build a nest cup if you're using those ironwood needles.
Yeah.
To peck at the hard dirt. We have a question from Brian Robinson. Thanks so much for your great work. The time series photos are very dramatic. Have you seen any correlations in the data between invasive species removal or native plant growth and metrics of albatross productivity? And if so, which correlations are strongest?
Can I go get my supervisor? John!
Yeah.
That would be John.
That is one of the things that the purpose of the eradication was to see if that was going to have a difference. My understanding is that, you know what, I'm not even going to pretend to.
Yeah, go.
Hold on.
Well, let me just.
Oh, here he comes. He heard you calling. Here you go.
He's logged in. He knows the question.
I present
Hey, John.
Listener, our resident albatross expert.
So the answer is we don't know. The problem with it has been that we did not have enough good early data on how the albatross were doing specifically early on. It was more anecdotal observations of birds that were struggling. The densities were down in some of those areas with Verbesina, but we don't have good hard data on it.
And my understanding, just, also understanding the albatross life cycle and how long-term it is and the sexual reproduction of them, is that it takes a while to build enough data to look and determine a trend, right? Or to make a deduction of some sort, like increase native plants, reduce non-native and or invasive, and increase productivity.
Yes, especially with these birds, so that really don't start breeding until they're 8 or 9 years old frequently.
Right.
You can have very low reproductive success, and you wouldn't be able to see any difference in the population for a decade or more.
Right. So it's a long-term proposition. And guess what? So I just got a message from Amanda. Classic, right? I don't think we've ever had a webinar with this issue. Midway is going to lose power in about 2 minutes now, probably, because they're doing a generator swap. So for those of you who wonder what life is like on Midway Atoll, this is what they have to deal with. I did have more questions, but we're going to leave it at that. And I want to thank the two of you and John and your volunteers and the rest of your team for all you're doing, and for everybody who's showed up, as well as Jamie behind the scenes. Thanks for helping out. Great job. And what a wonderful way, at least for me, to wrap up Hawaii Invasive Species Awareness Month. So again, thank you so very much.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us, Kim.
Thank you.
Feel free to email us if you have questions that you were not able to ask because we are losing power.
Will do.